Perfect.
Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation okay? And can
Not
see me
yet.
okay?
I can see
Okay.
you, but I don't see your screen if you're sharing that.
I am, but hang on, let me try exiting out and try
Am
that
I the only
again.
one?
Maybe I picked the wrong. Oh, maybe because I have to click share. See? Told you, different features. Okay, let's try that and then go into the full presentation. Yes, okay there. And then nope, that's not what I want. Oh, the joys of modern technology. I have a menu bar that's getting in my way and I can't get to um,
I know that's like you gotta
right?
drag
Like
it up. You can grab it and drag it away, I think.
the menu bar or the PowerPoint. Like I'm trying
The
to grab.
menu, the actual menu bar, you should be able to move it aside.
Ooh, okay, oh, there we go. Thank you very much. Yes, there we go. Bottom of my screen. I'm so happy we're recording all of. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay. How does that look now? So we've got a
Perfect.
full screen. Okay. All right, so welcome everyone. This is a registration refresher on FERPA, but with a twist today because I am joined with three advisor colleagues who will help personalize this experience and really kind of, I think, illustrate some of the things that we talk about with FERPA. Because FERPA, for the most part, seems commonsensical, and then when you're in the middle of a moment, you're like, suddenly I'm in a gray area and I don't really know what to do. So we're going to discuss some of those scenarios. So for those of you who may not have met me yet, either in person or digitally, such as this, my name is Liza Lagman Sperl. I am the Outreach and Communications Manager for the Office of the Registrar. But prior to that, I was the Registration Manager in charge of all the settings for Banner that allow registration. Prior to that, I was an academic advisor for about 17 years. So I try my best to keep the scenarios and the situations that you might find yourself in mind when I'm doing things like modifying our website or creating training materials or joining you for presentations like this. So thank you for having me. My three presenters, if you could introduce yourselves in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess Carlin. I'm the academic advisor or undergraduate academic advisor for the theater and dance department. This is my second year here as an advisor, but prior to that, I was high school English and theater teacher for 15 years.
Ooh, very cool. Thank you. Colleen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen McKinney. I'm an academic advisor in the Department of Computer Science, and I recently, in September, celebrated my 13th year here.
Congratulations. Excellent. Christina.
Hi, my name is Christina Patten. I am a pre-nursing advisor here at Wayne State. I just got my 1 year in June, so coming up on a year and a half, I think, if I'm doing my math right.
Excellent. Well done, everybody. Thank you. Okay, so you're going to hear from me for a little bit, and then once we've gone through the more dry stuff, we'll then illustrate things with a few scenarios of where you might find yourself wondering, how does FERPA apply? How should I respond to this? What do my colleagues have to say about how this works? So, FERPA is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records, and it actually applies to all students if a school is receiving federal aid. So that includes actually kindergarten through 12. We just don't think about it very much because FERPA rights reside with the parents or guardians. It really becomes a question for us at the university because those rights transfer then to the student. When a student turns 18 or they enroll and attend classes at a post-secondary institution, that student is the person who then decides how their records can be viewed. They're the ones who are responsible for reviewing it and making any corrections. And so we have students then who may not know or are not used to thinking about privacy for themselves. So for dual enrollment students, because I know this does come up and I know that we are constantly looking to encourage students to look at dual enrollment, the parents retain rights over the high school record. And then again, when the student turns 18 or transitions to the university, then they take over. These rights do expire upon death. So transcripts, whether or not a student, anything that might be personally identifiable for a student is no longer protected under FERPA. But thankfully that doesn't really come up very often. You might have like a family member, for example, who might want to verify, oh, did my grandfather go here? And they might put in a request, but it's relatively infrequent. We're talking mostly about the students who are here. 4 main rights in terms of FERPA. The student has a right to inspect and review their education record. What is an education record? Well, it's anything that has what's called PII, personally identifiable information. So name, address, ID number, grades, midterm grades, test scores, GPA. And even though FERPA was established in 1974, we really didn't think too hard about this, as evidenced by the fact that when I was an undergraduate here, you still had your social number as your ID number, and you'd still look at the grades for your classes on the doorway of a room based on the last 4 digits. So it's really only relatively recently, all things considered, that we've really become very serious about FERPA. The next right is to request that an institution correct any education records that the student believes are inaccurate or misleading. Now, this doesn't mean that if a student disagrees with a grade, that they're protected under FERPA to then protest and change that. We obviously have other avenues for that. At one point, a while back, every college was asked to identify the route through which a student would be able to contest a grade, starting with the instructor, and then the chair, and then the dean, and so on. But that's different from FERPA. FERPA is strictly concerned with any other information that a student might believe is inaccurate or misleading. The Office of the Registrar is your main contact person or entity for any questions like this that arise. So if you do have a situation where a student looks at their transcript and says, well, my address is incorrect or my middle name is wrong, we handle that for them. But in terms of grade appeals and so on, that's through the proper channels as identified by each college. Students have the right to control disclosure of their education record. And there are 2 different ways that they can do this. First of all, they can identify somebody who can advocate on their behalf or who can access their educational record. And this is done through a form called the Release of Academic Records form. It's a very straightforward form on our website. There are links at the end of this presentation. You can also find them on wayne.edu/registrar. And it's pretty simple, actually. A student logs in, their name and their access ID auto-populate. They type in the name of the person and identify the relationship to that person. But relationship doesn't necessarily mean that they're related, okay? They don't have to be an immediate family member or anything like that. They could say Joe Schmo off the street has access to my records. But it does get noted centrally within Banner, and then I'll show you where you can access that in STARS, so that way you know if a person who says that they have the right to talk about a student's record really does have that ability. What we don't have is the ability to rescind that right through a form. If a student has granted permission for someone to access their file and then later changes their mind, they would email us through academic records at wayne.edu or registration at wayne.edu, and we would take care of it for them that way. There is also the ability to restrict or release directory information. We will talk about what is the definition of directory information. Primarily what happens is students put that confidential flag on their account and then they find that their email address then suddenly doesn't appear. It becomes unavailable. And so they usually then remove that flag right away. It has fairly limited usage, to be honest. Most of the time, directory information is fairly innocuous. Thankfully, there are very few instances where a person might want to not have their information appear in the directory, and that's what this is primarily for in those unfortunate situations. But if a student thinks that they're just completely locking down their record, it's not. It's really more about if they were to look for themselves on wayne.edu, what appears. And I meant to put in a screenshot of that, but really all that we usually tend to show is a student's name, their Wayne State email, and then their major. So a lot of the things that we consider directory information aren't even usually displayed. So we have the ability to restrict or release directory information, but a lot of times most students tend to reverse it almost the same day once they realize that their emails don't quite appear correctly and their instructors don't know then who they are when they go to send them messages. Oh, sorry, let me back up. There is a box here at the bottom. There is an exception because we are a public institution. If you are an employee at the university, you cannot remove your name from the directory. I'm sure that there are extreme cases. HR probably would be the ones to address that. But generally speaking, if you work here, you are required to have your information, your directory information available. In stars, this is what it would look like. Pardon me. And I did redact all the personally identifiable information. So that's what you would see here. So if you ever did need to take a screenshot to share with anyone, this is what I would generally recommend that you do in order to make things FERPA friendly. Excuse me. You'll notice that at the top of the main page, when you bring up a student, there is a FERPA flag that says yes or no. If it has a Y and you go under contact demographics and FERPA and the overview, it will then show you exactly who has the ability to access a student's account or who they've been approved to do that and what their relationship is. It also shows you from what date that that access was granted. So if a student says, well, I don't remember ever doing that. Well, okay, it was 10 years ago in my case for some of these. So that's why you wouldn't remember or you might not remember. In Banner, it's on the form called SOAFOLK. So there is also an emergency form that sometimes gets used by some schools and programs, SFAMERG. I haven't checked to see if that actually counts as a FERPA release. It's not one that I see very often, but when a student files the FERPA release form, it populates SOAFOLK generally about once or twice a day. It's an automated system. And then a student has a right to file a complaint if the university does not properly address their concerns. FERPA has some guidelines in terms of what that exactly means and how much time is allowed. It's generally about 45 days, if I recall correctly, for addressing concerns, privacy concerns. And this would be the address that a student would use to do that. One of the reasons why it's good to be aware of FERPA regulations and what would happen if you were to violate them is because if a student is, or if a school is found in violation of FERPA, they can lose some of their federal funding. And so it is always a good idea to just sort of keep in mind that you don't want to have personally identifiable information readily available and to make sure that you're taking steps to protect student records. So, as always, with every rule and regulation, there are exceptions. Directory information, which we'll go into in just a moment. In the case of a health or safety emergency, thankfully, again, these are relatively rare. If somebody were to come up to your front counter and say, oh my gosh, I've got a health or emergency, you could contact public safety and they'll help negotiate that situation, figure out how to verify if that person has a legitimate cause, and then determine how we can locate the student and best work in that situation. If the student is under 21 and there's information about their illegal use or possession of alcohol or drugs, again, that's something where we would work with public safety. School officials with legitimate educational interests, such as financial aid. So the thing that allows us as professionals to discuss student cases with each other for financial aid, to follow up with student like satisfactory academic appeals, that sort of thing, without having to get permission from the student every single time, is because those are legitimate educational interest situations where we're not discussing something publicly with the student. It's all in secure channels, or we're speaking with each other. And so those are the sort of exceptions. And then there are military requests, referred to as the Solomon Act, where military entities can ask for rosters of students so that they can recruit them to join the military. So what is directory information? These include things like name, Wayne State provided email, major, and so on. For athletic purposes, this would be things like height and weight for various classifications, degrees that have been received, and awards. Again, in the Wayne State Directory, we don't actually display all of this information, such as things like enrollment status or dates of enrollment. They're just what's part of our policy in terms of directory information. So here are some basic recommendations in terms of FERPA. When you're away from your desk, lock your computer. Usually it's Control L if you're on a Windows machine. You can put the computer to sleep if you're on a Mac, just to make sure that when you're not at your desk, somebody couldn't walk by or look through a window or just somehow see a student's information. Use your Wayne State email and encourage your students to use their Wayne State email, and as much as possible, encourage faculty to use their Wayne State email. This is a challenge for sure. Not everybody thinks about it, but Wayne State's email, when you're using it from one address to the other, has some protections, a little bit more security. Certainly things are more identifiable when you're going from one Wayne State email to another. It's still not completely secure. You would still not want to put a ton of personal information necessarily in there. But also using your Wayne State email just encourages students to, excuse me, make sure that they're keeping things in the Wayne State ecosystem as far as technology is concerned. When you're working with a student, you're looking something up in Banner or Stars and you finish your advising session, clear your screen, hit that start over button when you're in Banner, and just make sure that you're ready for the next student without having them possibly be able to glimpse the previous student's information. Instruct parents or authorized persons to speak with the student about the FERPA release form. If you have a parent that's demanding information from you, it's completely legitimate to say, you really should be speaking with your student about this. We do have some federal guidelines that prohibit my being able to disclose things to you, and then you can refer them to the FERPA form. When you look further in FERPA, they do mention making note of any share requests and their outcome. This can just be a quick note that you jot perhaps in Stars or on a notepad at your desk if you just feel like there's been a recommendation or a request for information, just to document it for yourself in case you're asked about it at a future date. Do not discuss students' grades with other students. Certainly you wouldn't do that. These are just some of this is boilerplate that I use with lots of different groups that ask me about FERPA. So these things are going to seem very, very obvious, I'm sure. When you send a group email to a bunch of students, certainly using a BCC, a blind carbon copy, is a good recommendation so that the students don't know who you're addressing directly until maybe they show up for an advising session or a counseling appointment. But in terms of the language that you would use, I could imagine, in fact, I'm sure I've seen it, an instructor say, you've all failed. Please come in to see me during office hours, and all the students can see each other's names. That is a FERPA violation because you're disclosing information about that student's performance. And so don't do that. Do not share students' grades or personal information with third parties. If you ever have a request come through to you and you're in doubt about it, be sure to ask your director, or they can ask us, or you can ask me and I can get a clearer definition on that for you. Never feel obligated to share information if you're uncertain at all if it meets FERPA guidelines. If there's any doubt at all and it's a gray area, reach out first. If there's somebody right in front of you, you can certainly say, I've got some federal guidelines. I'd like to take down your name and contact information, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. That is completely a legitimate response to a request. Okay, so before we go into the scenarios, I do see that we've got some chat activity. Okay, let me just make sure that I love the hello party people. Okay, so Kate has, I always coach advisors that they can ask for a request in writing, slows things down, and you can also refer to the Welcome Center. Yep, absolutely. Okay. So each of our panelists have chosen a common advising scenario. They're going to present that scenario and how they've responded to it, and then we can have some discussion. The joy of a small screen. I just want to make sure that we're good on time. We've got 4 of them all together, so we do have an extra bonus one, which is great. And then we've got some summary, and we can do some question and answer after that if there's time. So we are going to start with, there we go, with Jess. Take it
Hey.
away.
Okay, so in this scenario, this is something that I've come across, and I had a student that was very unhappy with their grade and the situation in a class, and their parent ended up calling me extremely angry about the situation and demanding names. She wanted names of the teacher and the teacher and supervisor and things like that. And one of the things I highly encouraged was for this person to speak to their student to help empower them and their ability to self-advocate. I did check FERPA permissions. I don't believe mom was on it. So I was like, okay, there are federal guidelines essentially. I'm like, I cannot speak to you, but empower your student, and explained, just very briefly that FERPA puts the power in their students' hands. And so legally I couldn't speak to her any further, but encouraged to chat with their student to advocate and show them how to advocate for themselves.
Sorry, I was moving my chat screen around and was like, wait, where's the audio button? Excellent. Yeah. Did anybody else have any other suggestions? I mean, that's exactly putting it in the students' hands, making sure that they're the front person on this whole thing is absolutely how I would handle it. So does anybody have any other suggestions, or and feel free to just unmute and jump in. Introduce yourself and say if you have an opinion of what could be done, what else could be done in this situation. Thankfully, it's pretty straightforward.
But I'm
Like,
also thinking, like, what about that information? Like, if the parent knows the class and the time and the day, like, they could find this information anyway,
Yeah.
right? Like, so there's not a whole lot you could do if they really wanted to contact a professor but you don't have to disclose any of that.
right, absolutely. Like that's it. I don't know how you politely say, well, you could Google that, but
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't suggest it, but
in terms of being able to, it is nice to be able to say there are federal guidelines that prohibit me from giving you the student's schedule.
Yeah.
And so go talk to your student. And then hopefully by then they can kind of keep that out of the instructor's inbox, because they're just going to say, well, yeah, your student failed. I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? So, but yes, you're right. A lot of that is information that a parent could look up on their own, if they knew what the class was. And we do have that browse classes part of the class schedule. So yeah, they could find an instructor if they wanted to. But that doesn't mean that you have to make it easy for them, by disclosing that student's schedule.
Yeah. And in this moment, I was like super uncomfortable providing that information. And she didn't actually know the name of the class. She just knew that there was a person and it was a theater class and that this thing happened. And like, I was like, okay, whoa. Let's like take it back a little bit.
Let's de-escalate this slightly and
Yeah.
then actually talk about the situation. Yeah, there's definitely an element of that. Some of it's just how to diffuse the situation. And so that brings it to the idea of, well, we could talk about things in general, right? So if a student finds themselves in this situation, you don't necessarily have to speak in specifics to the parent, but they do, they do want to be heard. So, well done for handling that one. Anything else on this particular scenario? Do we have anything in the chat? Let's see. Yes. Yes, Laura, we could do a whole entire session, I think, on how to diffuse upset parents. Okay. Kimberly, let me come back to, Kimberly has a question about removing the FERPA flag from their account. Basically what I would say is if you would have that student email registration@wayne.edu and have them explicitly say, I would like to remove this person from my FERPA, we can take it from there. But if that still doesn't happen, then reach out to me directly and I'll try to get that shepherded through. Another question that came in, Caroline, what if I have a Zoom meeting with multiple students and then email the slides to them after? Should I still be using the BCC? I mean, it's just a good practice, I would guess. But if you want them to be able to communicate with each other as a group to like support each other, then I don't see that would be a problem. The slides from your presentation are going to be generic and not necessarily focused on them exactly, right? I would
Right.
guess.
Yeah,
So
right.
so yeah, but I tend to use the BCC just so that way you don't get somebody replying. Well, they could reply all anyway, I suppose. But then it's just one less thing identifying who's part of that messaging. But for
Right.
something like that, I would think you could just copy or email it to them all directly. That would be
Okay.
your judgment.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to the next scenario. I believe that's Colleen. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Mm.
So the types of meetings for documentation that make me uncomfortable afterwards, because I'm a very detail-oriented person, and sometimes we can't provide all the details. Just when you're meeting with a student and they share some, intense details about their home life, perhaps a parent died. We've had friends that have committed suicide. It seems that, the whole mental health area has gotten way worse post-COVID. So, they're struggling with things at home and then, trying to figure out how to balance, their coursework and staying on top of things. So summarizing these types of appointments, we can't obviously use a lot of detail around that. So being more vague, that they, discuss circumstances that are impacting their academic performance. And then obviously during the appointments, we're referring them to CAPS for mental health support and things like that. But since we can't say that in our notes, it's more like made appropriate referrals.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. At your desk, you're allowed to keep what are called desk notes. And those are your personal private documentation, I suppose. And those things aren't considered part of FERPA. So, if it does mean that you need to keep a personal notebook or a locked document to yourself, it's FERPA and the educational record refers to things that are centrally accessible to somebody who has the proper security clearance to do so. So you're right. When you have some of these more difficult situations where you yourself, just as part of processing, right, want to be able to, okay, did I cover all of my bases? Did I properly make sure that I referred them to all the correct resources? Do I want to make sure that I remember the next time I speak to this student? That's where a desk note would be appropriate then, for you to keep your own private notes about your conversation with that student. But that would then probably, I would suggest then, if you have a locked drawer in your desk, just so that way that stuff maintains a semblance of security. Anyone have anything to add to this? When you're in STARS or if you're using Banner and you're using Spaccomment, this is where it is that general rule of thumb of if you wouldn't put it on a postcard, don't put it in the notes, to try and keep it as bland and generic and straight to the point as possible, just so that way, if it does become, if there is a breach of some sort, that it's not, excuse me, compromised. Jessica, you had a question or a statement. Oh, you're muted. Or not. I'm not sure if I'm not getting any sound. Can anyone else hear?
Hello?
No? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Hey, there you are.
Sorry, it's this
Oh.
laptop. It's like my laptop is, because that's the speaker has to be like right over by me. So, so I'm working on a project and it's like, it's academic success plans, for students who are on probation. We're getting ready to pilot one for our pharmacy group. And when I'm thinking of things that they put on the success plan, a lot of it's pretty personal. Like what caused you to not be successful? Maybe, they've had mental health issues or they've had this or that, whatever they want to put on there. And that document has to be sent to their faculty advisor. Like I'm thinking of this out loud as we're, kind of I mean, they do have to click though, that they know it's going to their faculty advisor. So for someone who doesn't want that shared, right? And it's a requirement. So I'm just thinking of this out loud.
Yeah.
Working through
I
this
think that might
process.
be something that we might, I mean, I don't have a final proper answer for that at
Yeah.
all. Yeah, but it is certainly something to think about in terms of, are those appropriate things to, I mean, you know, probation's always a tricky one. I don't have as much experience with it, so that's definitely a good conversation to have after something like this, perhaps, right? And as you're developing this program and starting to pilot it out, um, and how those things get disclosed. I think about when I think about like the medical withdrawal process, right? We've had to create a very secure process to receive information from students, from their doctors, and keep that safe. So um, that may have to be a continuing conversation. Certainly not something that we could solve in this 1 hour session. But that's a good thing to keep in mind is what information are we asking for, making sure that it is truly relevant and useful, and then how do we securely do that? And what do we do in a situation when a student decides that, no, I really don't, I'm not comfortable disclosing this information, and to give them, to respect that request. So certainly a conversation that we can continue to have elsewhere. If you need me to ask upwards on that, certainly reach out to me and let me know. Does anybody have any suggestions to address Jessica's situation? We're all just like, ah, that sounds frightening. I know it's that balance of wanting to be helpful and useful to the student and to personalize our responses to them, and at the same time, to keep giving them those second, third chances to start fresh and to recover and to continue their educational journey. So definitely a challenge. I respect that the difficulty in that. And then hopefully we'll be able to find a good response. Laura.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that this is one of those spaces, the way it's similar in that working with students who are applying to professional competitive programs and might have some damage on their transcript, right? They might have some things they don't want to highlight. And what I talked to them about is and that this is, so your question made me think of this, Jessica, was like, anything you put down is something that other people might ask you about. So you have to be careful about, you know, so I'm really trying to coach the student on assessing their level of comfort in disclosing. You know, and we can talk strategies and things like that, and why you might want to share this, and how, like in the application process, it might be a good idea or it might not be a good idea. But once you've disclosed that information, you can't take it back, right? So trying to help them understand what their role in maintaining their privacy and where it might be appropriate and and then lots of conversations about how much disclosure is appropriate and how much is not. So if that's at all helpful.
Thank you.
It is interesting to think about when we talk about social media privacy and things like that, how just the word privacy has changed connotation and denotation over time, and what people are comfortable disclosing and what they're not, and then how that applies and how it could potentially affect or color their experiences. Tom, you have your hand up too.
From the legal standpoint, does that sort of stuff fall under the legitimate educational interest? Because we talk about a lot about this with coaching, you know, talking with faculty about a student's, you know, situation in the class or grades and sharing that sort of stuff. And if it's all in the interest of this, you know, legitimate educational interest or supporting student success, would that kind of cover the legal basis there?
In its intent, sure. My concern is in the documentation, right? So when we're talking grades or financial awards or things like that, those are, I guess, empirical. They're numbers. They don't have a value one way or the other. When we're talking about personal experiences or your impression of a student, or whether or not somebody was aggressive or assertive, let's say, right? Then it becomes, I think, a little bit more challenging in terms of, well, what would you document? What do you put in there? And then, like Laura said, once it's sort of written down and released in some way, how do you ensure its privacy all the way through that chain? That becomes a little bit more difficult. So I think, and that's one of these reasons why we keep having these discussions of what does student privacy mean? What is an educational record to what purpose does something get noted and documented and then shared? Is that a discussion that's best had in something more ephemeral, like a Teams meeting or a phone call or an in-person face-to-face discussion, as opposed to actually being hard copy? I don't have a good strong answer for that one way or the other, obviously. But it is that continuing awareness of, well, why is this documented? Where does this document live? Who has access to it? How do they have access to it? How are we making sure that we're protecting the student, and that we're gaining their consent when we need to?
And can I follow up on one other thing?
Yeah.
Is the BCC considered like enough of a firewall, or if if there's a group of students after midterm grades or something, that we wanted to send communication and say, we notice that you're in this situation, and doing that through the blind copy, is that as safe as doing it individually, or
I would still say
we not
individually
do
is
it that way?
probably still the safest, to be honest.
Okay.
Just because in terms of keeping it straight and whether or not you have it in the correct field and so on. I believe if you hit reply all on a BCC, it doesn't necessarily, like, you still can't see everybody that's in there. It just replies to the main, right? I have in communicating with students, I've used mail merge in Word to generate documents and then cut and paste that. That kind of helps reduce some of the repetitiveness of having to type it over and over and over again. But I would think that you could actually personalize it a little bit more in terms of addressing the student if you use an individual email as opposed to a group blind carbon copy. So there's that consideration as well, as opposed to, dear student, you're in this situation. So unless it's something where you're inviting them to a remedial session of some sort, where it's very generic, very broad, that's where I would suggest the BCC would be more useful. But if it's such that you want to be able to get to the student, say, hey, I've noticed this situation that you're on probation, what have you, that might be a more better suited to a one-on-one email directly instead. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Great discussion. All right, let's move on to the next one. Thank you, Colleen. Christina.
All right. So this happened last winter. I had a parent give me a phone call. And it was a pretty scary phone call. She was a bit overwhelmed. She was crying on the phone. But she let me know that her student, who was a first year, she was currently she like voluntarily went in and she was not like able to go to class. She was hospitalized for a couple of weeks. And she didn't know what to do, and she wanted to see if she could get her withdrawal from the classes. I looked at the student's record and I found out she didn't have a FERPA release. So I told her I'm not able to give you any information about her. If you are able to get into contact with her, I would ask her about what she would like to do for her next steps. And then she can reach out to me and I'm able to email her all of that information. She wasn't able to do that just because of the situation. She had absolutely no contact with her. So I spoke to my boss because I was like, I have no idea what to do. Like absolutely no idea. And Kate was great and she gave me some pointers. So I was able to get Dean of Students involved. They did an emergency FERPA release. But it was a very scary situation. You never want to do anything wrong, but I really wanted to help the student to make sure it didn't negatively impact her. She was able to get medically withdrawals and everything went all good and she's back on track doing amazing. But it's kind of scary because you never expect it. And when it happens, you're like, oh my God, what do I do? But yeah.
That's an intense situation for sure. So a lot of really great things in this scenario, in this response. First off, you obviously don't have to do this alone, right? You can always corroborate with your supervisor, with a colleague, just to make sure that you're not, especially in a very intense situation like this, continuing that conversation with the parent, just to say, okay, can you go back and speak, if you're speaking with a student, can you take down contact information? It's an ongoing, it's not something you're going to resolve necessarily right then and there. Working with like a care report to follow up with the student to figure out how that's going to work through DOSO. And then you mentioned the medical withdrawal. So we recently revised our medical withdrawal process. I see if I can drop or if somebody could do me a favor and go to wayne.edu/registrar under records, under forms. There's actually a whole entire page now for medical withdrawal, which is now, I think, what do we call it? Medical exception, where we've created an online form to make the process even more secure for students and to make it more straightforward. Students can now check the status of their medical exception request. And you can request a medical exception, I believe, 1 full year. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jessica. After the fact. So it's not something that has to happen immediately within that semester. It certainly can, as soon as student knows that they're not going to be able to finish that semester. But if there is a diagnosis, if there's a medical situation involved, the medical exceptions request is something, and it's not just about physical difficulties, right? We know that students, that mental health awareness has brought about a greater understanding of things that can impact a student's ability to be successful in a semester. And so a student should never have to feel like they have to prove some sort of extreme circumstance. It's whatever would possibly affect a person's ability to do well, and to complete the semester successfully. So very much encourage everyone to take a look at that. We've included step-by-step illustrated instructions. I'm the one who maintains all of our web pages. So if you see something that seems unclear or you have a question that you'd like to see answered in those instructions, please absolutely let me know, because we know that these are very intense situations, difficult situations. And so anything that we can do to help make that process clearer and easier. Jessica, you have your hand up. Oh no, you're mute again. You need to bring your your speaker over. I wonder if it's a loose wire or something, perhaps. No? Okay. Should we maybe move on to
Okay.
the next? Oh, there we go. I heard a noise.
Oh, now you hear it?
Yep.
That's so weird. Oh, sorry. Okay, what about, you said this can be done like a year after, right? Up to a year?
I believe it's been up to a year. Yep.
Okay. What about if someone is on, like, say their grade posts and puts them on probation?
Mm-hmm.
Can they still come back and do that? Or like, okay, and then that would remove that standing? Like change, if it was a
Potentially,
withdrawal versus
if
a
it was
grade that
approved,
caused
right?
them, or the grade that caused them probation?
Yeah, because it would be withdrawn and then it would be removed from their calculation. So
Thank you.
it has the potential to remove somebody from probation for sure. Okay. All right. We have one other bonus scenario. So let's get to that. Jess.
So this is something that frequently happens in theater and dance, because oftentimes casting is dependent upon grades, because we cannot in good faith or consciousness cast somebody that basically will tank and go into probation. But sometimes I'll have instructors say, so-and-so is not doing great in my class. Is this consistent? Or ask about their other grades. And at which point I'm like, well, I think it would probably be really beneficial to have a conversation with the student and ask them, like, what classes they find they're having success in and how they can replicate those skills or abilities or habits. And I'm like, I can absolutely, if you have concerns about the student doing well in your class, I can reach out and just do a check-in, see how they're doing, and then provide them with university resources, but I'm not going to share their grade with you. So
Absolutely. And when we talk about the fact that student schedules and transcripts and things, oh, can I advance the slide? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not? Sorry.
I think it
My
went back.
apologies. Yep, there it is. There we go. Okay. Yeah, class schedules and grades are part of the student's academic record, and so that student would need to consent. Oh, you're quite welcome, Helen. Would need to consent to your discussing their full transcript, their full class schedule with that instructor. my initial response always when I hear this is, oh, what a lovely concerned instructor. That's great because we're so used to the stereotype of faculty just being like, well, I don't care, sink or swim. However you're doing is how you're doing, right? So the idea that somebody might be thinking holistically, one's first reaction might be, oh my gosh, yes, let's discuss this and think about a care plan and the whole thing. But the truth is, yes, that student's schedule and the other classes that they're in, and whether they have midterm grades and other courses, that really would require the consent of the student to discuss that more fully. And it may or may not really have as much bearing on that singular class. So I like your response, Jess, where you're like, well, if you're concerned, then let me reach out to the student. I'll talk with the student. Thanks for letting me know. I think that's actually a really good way to handle that. Did anyone else have anything? Or I know I've seen this situation come up more and more, or I've had instructors who have wanted to know what was the student like in the previous class in the prerequisite leading up to this. Is that a legitimate request for that professor to have?
Now, Liza, I do not think I would respond to that professor. I would not expose what this
No.
has done in other classes. No, I would talk about how he could improve in the professor's classes, but I would not share information. No.
Yep. And it's a legitimate response. I mean, these are all situations where your professional judgment, we rely on that quite a lot in terms of these guidelines. And again, you should never feel like you're alone in this situation. If you at all ever have a doubt, be sure to ask or talk with a
And I would
colleague.
like to think the professor is going to do it favorably. In other words, if the student had a pretty good track record, perhaps the professor would be a little easy in his grading. On the other hand,
Right.
he could go against the student. And I don't think he needs to.
Yeah, what's relevant is what's in front of you, right?
Right,
So
right.
as opposed to, and you could easily see a situation where a professor might be like, well, they failed all their other classes. Are they doing well in mine because they're cheating? Or there's so many things that could happen. And so what's nice is to be able to say, well, federal guidelines prohibit me from sharing this without the consent of the student. So really, I would think if somebody honestly had, felt a strong need, then that's a discussion that they could have with the student. But I can't imagine a student would feel real good about that either.
But I am heartened by the fact that a teacher would even take the time to ask about a student. That's nice. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
every now and then I'll get a student who. Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Arno.
It could lead to another conversation with the professor. Perhaps we can find some way of helping the student. But I like the fact that he would come down and ask.
Yeah, like I said, the stereotype that we usually have, and especially in a research institution setting, is that, that most professors don't really care one way or the other. And so when you do find one, you don't want to necessarily discourage them from being concerned, but certainly that whole team approach of, thanks for letting me know, I can reach out to the student, we'll take it from here. That's certainly a good way to think about it as a team. Anything else on this particular scenario? I know that we had something come up in the chat, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. Jamie mentioned having a situation with a parent of an incarcerated student, followed up with DOSO, and went with a care report. Those care reports, holy cow, what a really great advance. And thinking about a team approach to how we can focus on advising and the number of students that you have in your caseload, but then still be able to have that personal touch for the more difficult situations, to have somebody else be able to follow up, is really an amazing thing. Okay, I think that addressed all the things in the chat. I apologize if I did wind up missing anybody, but let me move on to the next slide. So thank you, advisors, for your scenarios. And like I said, for making this a much more interesting discussion than my just presenting the basic tenets of FERPA. But here are some conclusions just to wrap things up a bit, and then we can see if we have any additional Q&A. But when in doubt, don't give it out. Feel free to pause. You don't have to give out any information that might qualify as having PII on it if you at all have even a bit of concern. An immediate answer is not required. In this age where we're just trying to help as many people as possible, as efficiently and as quickly and as well as possible, we are all givers in a sense. That's what brought us into this particular line of work. And so we want to try and help and fix things as soon as possible. But sometimes it just means just a brief pause. Especially with parents, determine if there's a more general, or guardians for that matter, a more general or even a more secure way, if it means talking with a student, to provide information. A lot of times when somebody wants to know, like, well, will my student be kicked out? Is this the end of the line? There are definitely more general ways to say, look, a student who's in this situation has options, has resources. Worst case scenario, maybe they have to take a class at a community college, get their skills back up, and come back. There are ways to phrase your answers in a way that still leaves options and possibilities open without necessarily speaking directly specifically to a student. And then obviously, if you ever have any questions, you can ask for clarification from your department leadership, and then our office is available as a resource. And we can certainly consult with general counsel as well. Arnell, you had something to add?
Yes, PII, personal information.
Personally identifiable information. Yep.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I promise you, I did identify it earlier before I used the acronym.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't hear it.
No, you're good. I'm teasing you because in English, that's always the thing, right? To make sure that you've spelled it out at least once before you use it elsewhere. But yes, PII, personally identifiable information. Okay, some additional things here. Just some resources here for you. So again, I'll make sure that that we get a copy of this presentation out to you. But on our Office of the Registrar webpage, we have a whole entire page on privacy, the two forms that I mentioned for the release of academic records and the restrict or release of directory information, and then General Counsel also has their guidelines for FERPA. The Department of Education also has resources, including an FAQ and a training module specifically for colleges and universities. It's about 45 minutes, and at the end you get a spiffy little certificate that you can have on hand to show that you've gone through the full training. But it sets up even more scenarios and their opinions of how you might respond to various things that might come up. And that concludes our presentation. So
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Stop
Nice.
sharing here.
Like
There it is. Stop
more
share.
question or comment?
Sure.
Do so what I recall from previous discussions of this, there being a difference between an applicant and a student in how FERPA applies, and we especially work with students that are doing external applications. But even if somebody, like, let's say somebody's just an applicant at the university, is there a distinction, and what might that be?
I never get a clear answer on this ever.
All right, so I don't feel so bad.
No, I mean, it seems to almost be different every other year, right? Like, so the idea of at least once they turn 18, the FERPA kicks in. But we do have those students who are just in that mid spot, right? And I think that's what when we see things like when they enroll and like apply and enroll, like, so do they need to be registered? If they registered and then they dropped, I find it's always best to just assume that FERPA applies, and then look for clarification depending on the scenario from there, or again to consider whether or not the student needs to give consent for something to be disclosed. But yeah, I find it's never really super clear, and it just depends on what the prevailing wisdom is at the time, in terms of whether or not just having applied. But yeah, that interim between high school graduation and starting the first day of classes is always kind of slippy for me. I've never seen a really good, if I ever find one, I'll let you know. At least you can find it, Moira.
I think
Let
it's
you know.
school specific, which is why I think it's so muddy, is that schools can define it for themselves. And
Yeah.
I want to, now don't quote me, but I want to say I heard Kurt say once, use the first day of classes. So, but I don't think, I've never seen it in writing or anything, so.
Yeah, because enroll for one person might mean, you've applied, I guess. You're one of ours now. But yeah, I think with anything post-secondary, I just assume it's that whole in loco parentis idea, right? Like that that now everything is transferred from the parents to the student, and then we just assume that's the default.
Thanks.
Helen had a question. I was wondering, if I share info with another advisor on a student question, how does FERPA relate? Again, if you're talking advisor to advisor, that's a legitimate educational interest. You don't
Okay,
have to get.
that's what it was. It
Yeah.
was like
Mhm.
the student was asking about a class to do with the professor wanting her to withdraw. And so I asked the advisor in that department, do you have like an appeal process, or how would you handle that? And she wrote a
Oh,
detailed answer. Is that all right?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, that's and I'm sure that some of that was actually phrased generically because you have other students who might have a similar situation, right? So, but no, advisor to advisor, advisor to financial aid to academic staff, even advisor to faculty. Those are all things that don't require, because gosh, can you imagine how long it would take to do anything if we had to ask? We would just have to have consent up front from students, and that would just be a nightmare. So, so yeah, as long as it's all kept securely with student privacy in mind,
Okay.
that's the main idea behind these things.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Well, thank you again to our 3 advisors for joining me on this, and thank you all for your kind attention and for this great discussion. I'm sure that we will continue to have this conversation repeatedly, just as a reminder and as a way to kind of commiserate with some of the things that come up where FERPA should be considered. So,
Thank you,
all
Liza.
right. Thank you. And yeah, I'll email that copy of the presentation to you shortly.